Hello and welcome to this recreation of my very first online class, Easy Chart Interpretation. I held my first live online class today, February 6, 2016, with about 86 wonderful participants. And we had so much fun, and the class went really well, but I forgot to record it. I know there were a lot of people who were interested in attending the class, but they really couldn't because they were in some time zone that made it difficult. And some of the people who did attend the class were interested in having it to refer back to. So what I'm doing is just sitting down here in my office and recreating the class that I gave earlier. And it's sad that I won't have the wonderful chat commentary that was coming in from the participants in the class, but I have all my slides and my notes, so I think we can probably give you a pretty good recreation of it. It's a pretty short class. It's just 45 minutes long, and I'm going to share my favorite quick, easy tips for reading a birth chart pretty quickly. This class doesn't include transits and progressions or any kind of predictive techniques. It's just a simple, easy approach to reading an astrology chart. Now, to get the most out of the class, you do need to know a little astrology. You need to be familiar with the signs of the zodiac, the planets, the houses, and if you know how to find and interpret planetary aspects, so much the better, but we're not really going to go into that today, aside from a few big, fat, easy-to-see ones. It's helpful if you know something about the signs' elements, fire, earth, air, and water, and the modalities, cardinal, fixed, immutable, but it's not completely essential, and I do cover that in the class. Okay, let's get started. So as we know, an astrology chart can tell us so much. If it's a chart for a person, it can tell us about their characteristics, their personality, the way they present themselves to the world, their ambitions, how they see themselves in relationship. There's a lot you can tell from looking at a birth chart. But context is everything. And there's plenty that a chart can't tell you. If you look at a chart like the one I have down here, you can't even tell, is it the chart of a person, an event, a wildebeest? Because an astrology chart is just a snapshot of the sky at any given moment. And at any given moment, lots of different things are going on. I'm sitting here in my office recording this class for you. Somebody is being born. Some couple is getting married. Someone's leaving the planet. And they all have the same chart. Even if we do know that it's the chart of a person, we can't tell if it's male or female, living or dead. We don't know anything about the person's sexual orientation, their marital status, their political beliefs, their profession, their religion. Gives us a lot of clues about some of those things. We can get a general idea of their approach to the idea of marriage and whether or not they might favor a particular profession. But the best thing to do really to get some context in which to place the information you have from the chart is to just ask. Before I do a reading, I always ask a client to fill out a questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, I ask just a few questions to get a sense of what their life looks like and what it is they're really interested in talking about. It's not really cheating. It's about placing things in a meaningful context. And then what I come up with from the chart could mean a lot more to my client. So this is the chart that I'm going to be using as an example today. And this is indeed the chart of a person. It is a male person. He is alive, which is good news. He is 51 years old, was born and lives in California. He's gay. He's engaged to be married, and he works in social services. And by way of a little more context, this is the chart from my oldest and closest friend. I've known him for about 42 years. A spectacular person. And because I know him and his chart so well, I always like to use his chart as an example. So he did give me permission. I just saw him last night, and he was tickled at the idea of everybody in this class seeing his chart and chiming in about it, and said to tell you all hello. So the first thing I like to do is just stand back and take a look at the chart. People don't believe it when I say this, but I've been reading charts for many, many years. And every time I sit down with a new chart, I look at it and I'm kind of overwhelmed, and the symbols just swim in front of my eyes and I don't know what to say. So you have to break it down piece by piece, and you pull a little piece of a thread and see what unravels. So the first thing you do is just stand back and you just look at the chart like it's a piece of art. Where does your eye go? And if you're like me, your eye goes down here. Look at all this stuff. And for the moment, that's enough. It's just sort of an impression. It's like, ooh, where does the eye go? Because that's going to end up being an important part of the chart for you. So to break it down, I begin by looking to see if there are any planets bunched together, emphasized by sign or house. In this chart, we see there are a number of planets bunched together in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is a sign that emphasizes sensitivity, vulnerability, compassion, empathy, spirituality. It's often a musical or artistic sign, interested in dance, film, photography. It's a very rich and complex sign. But we know a lot of these things that I just mentioned are probably important in the life of a person who has several planets in Pisces. Is there an emphasis by house? Well, yeah, we can see that the third house down here, 1, 2, 3, is chock full of stuff. It's got 4 planets, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, and the Sun. So there's a lot going on in the third house. Traditional astrology called the third house the house of communication. And it is about communication, the way we speak and the way we listen and the way we learn and the skills that we develop and how we go out and share our story with the world. This chart also has a sort of oversized, emphasized 3rd and 9th house. And this just means that these houses of the chart, the matters associated with them, are going to be especially important in this person's life, because transits and progressions and anything that moves around the chart is going to spend more time in these houses because they're bigger. The 3rd and the 9th house axis really has to do with learning and making sense of your world. The 3rd house deals with matters and people close to home, like siblings and neighbors, people that you spend time with in your day-to-day life who are somewhat like you. Whereas the 9th house represents the larger world of people and ideas. The next thing I do is look to see if there are any planets within about 5 degrees of the angles of the chart. The angles are the cusps of the 1st and 7th houses, the ascendant and descendant, the houses of self and relationship, and the cusps of the 4th and 10th houses, the IC and MC, the houses of home and family and worldly pursuits. Planets that are close to these angles usually represent striking and noticeable characteristics in the person. Now, this chart doesn't have any planets bunched real closely around those angles. However, if I look at the sun down here at almost 20 degrees of Pisces, and I see this ascendant at 23 degrees of Sagittarius, as this little line and symbol suggests, there is a square aspect between these two, a pretty tight one. So that makes the sun work sort of like an angular planet, the fact that it's in such close contact with the ascendant and descendant of the chart. That means the sun becomes a more prominent and important planet. And it also means that the sun in Pisces, which we would normally think of as a sort of a gentle, quiet, self-effacing sign for the sun, takes a lot more prominence and probably is a little more Leo-like, given the fact that it's in a close aspect with the ascendant and becomes sort of an angular planet. Next, take a look at the hemispheres of the chart. I look to see if planets are concentrated in one half of the chart, the half above or below the horizon, or to the left of the or right of the vertical axis. If you were born with a lot of planets above the horizon, these are what we call the diurnal houses. These are the houses that the sun moves through during the daylight hours. So the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th houses. People born with a lot of planets in this half of the chart are ambitious and they play to win. Matters that are represented by the planets in the top part of the chart are experienced and understood by the person through engaging with the outside world. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily any more extroverted or outgoing than anybody else, but it means that there is a lot about their world that they'll only understand by getting out there and being in the outside world. People who are born with a lot of planets below the horizon are born with planets in the nocturnal part of the chart. And these are the houses that the sun goes through at night when we don't see it. So it's the 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st houses. These people deal with the world in a more subjective and instinctual way. And their chart is full of planets that can only really be understood and experienced internally and close to home. So these are people for whom family, siblings, and neighbors, co-workers, and the like are especially important in their understanding of themselves. I like to say that people born with a lot of stuff in the top part of the chart are sort of what you see is what you get. Whereas people with lots of things underneath the horizon, there's usually a little bit more there than meets the eye. And they can take a longer time to get to know. And as you can see in this chart, it is the case that an overwhelming majority of the planets are underneath the horizon. So this might be a person with the sun angular and in the 3rd house, so he's like really communicative and he stands out and very charismatic with the sun angular. But really, to get to know him takes time. The other way of splitting the chart in two is to take a look at the emphasis on the left side and right side of the charts, using the MC and the IC, or the cusp of the 4th and 10th houses, as your dividing line, the vertical axis. So look to the left-hand eastern side of the chart, and if there are a lot of planets on this side, you get a person who's kind of Aries in nature. They're an initiator, a go-getter, a pioneer. They're early adopters, and they like to get things going. People with a lot of things on the right or western side of the chart are somewhat more Libran in nature. They tend to be collaborative and supportive, a little more responsive to other people's ideas or how things are going to impact another person. So they will take other people into account a little bit more before they act. It's not necessarily because they're nicer people or they care more. It's just that they're more attuned to what other people are going to think, or they're looking at what other people are doing, and that influences what they do. That's much less the case for people with an emphasis of planets on the eastern side of the chart. And in this chart, we can see there definitely is an emphasis on this side of the chart, and he is very much the kind of person who decides what he's going to do and just does it. So a quick summary of what we've looked at so far. First, we've looked for groupings of planets by sign and house. And we did find that there was there was a big grouping of planets in the sign of Pisces and in the third house. So this gives us a person who will probably be empathetic, artistic. There's an emphasis in the life on learning and siblings and communication. We also saw that the third and ninth houses were emphasized not only because there are a lot of planets there, but because they are larger than the other houses. So there's an emphasis in his life on learning, teaching, education. In some cases, there would be an emphasis on travel. He doesn't actually do a lot of traveling. The sun is angular in the chart, which points to a very charismatic personality, someone who is a performer, someone who is noticed when he walks in a room. There are more planets below the horizon than above. This means there's kind of more to him than meets the eye, and it can take a while to get to know him. And there are more planets on the eastern or left side of the chart than on the right or western side of the chart. So he's got a little more of an Aries cast to his personality. He's a go-getter. So next I take a look at the signs that the planets are in. First I break it down by element. If we divide the 12 signs of the zodiac into 4 groups of 3 signs each, this describes the qualities of temperament of the person. We have the fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, the earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, the air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, and the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. People who are born with a lot of planets in the fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, have the fire sign qualities of enthusiasm. They're leaders, and they're very dynamic individuals. People born with a lot of planets in earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, tend to be pragmatists. They're very reliable, and they like to do things. At the end of the day, they like to survey their desk or wherever they've been working and say, yes, I did that today. Air sign people, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. People with a lot of planets in these signs are very sociable, very communicative, and they are thinkers. Everything happens from the neck up with air sign people. And those born with a lot of planets in water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, are intuitive, empathetic, and very vulnerable. So how does this chart break down by element? Well, we can see there are not a lot of planets in fire signs. The ascendant is in Sagittarius. That's a fire sign. Jupiter is in Aries, another fire sign. The other fire sign is Leo, and we don't have any planets in that sign. So only 2 things in fire. The earth signs, which we'll find in brown, Venus in Taurus, Uranus and Pluto in Virgo, nothing in Capricorn. So 3 planets in earth. Air signs, we have the moon and Saturn in Aquarius, and the midheaven in Libra. And finally, quite a lot in water. We have Mars, Mercury, and the Sun in Pisces. The North Node's in Cancer, but I'm actually not going to count that for these purposes. And Neptune is in Scorpio. So the chart is actually fairly well balanced by element. Earth and air are evenly matched. He can get stuff done. He's got a strong intellect. But he's a little stronger in water element than he is in fire. So although he'll often appear like a very dynamic, robust, fun-loving fire sign person, because it's a fire sign on the ascendant, which describes how we present ourselves to the world. More about that later. And Jupiter tends to exaggerate whatever sign it's in. He really comes across as very much a fire sign. But scratch the surface, and there's a lot of water energy. So what happens often when people have a lot of planets in water is they're incredibly sensitive to the moods and, well, mostly the moods and emotions of the people around them. And because of that, they can get really worn out being around people for very long, unlike fire signs who love to get out there and be around people and really perform. So a water sign person, especially one that acts very gregarious, then has to go away and rest and retreat and be by himself a good deal and get plenty of naps with a lot of planets and water signs. Next, I break the signs down according to their modalities. The modalities are 3 groups with 4 signs each: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And they describe your general approach to getting things done. The cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And their characteristics are that they are initiators. They're a little bit impatient. They like to keep things moving forward. And a good way to remember which are the cardinal signs are they're the ones that the sun enters at the beginning of a new season. So here in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun enters Aries in late March and spring begins. When it enters Cancer at the end of June, summer begins. When it enters Libra, we get autumn, and when it enters Capricorn, we get winter. So the cardinal signs begin the seasons, they begin things. And then they hand them off to the fixed signs: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. The fixed signs are the builders and managers. They're the ones that keep things going. So the cardinal signs initiate something, and then the fixed signs are the ones that codify it, legislate it, and create a structure to keep it going. People with a lot of things in mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, are the idea people. They're adaptable, they're flexible, they manage information. They're the frontline people, they're the salesmen. So you have Gemini asking questions and dispersing information. You have Virgo trying to come up with new systems for doing things. Sagittarius and Pisces with a lot of inspirational big ideas for how to do things. They'll gather a lot of information and then feed it back up the chain, up to the fixed people and the cardinal people. So how does this chart break down with modalities? Well, not a lot of cardinal energy. We have Jupiter in Aries, the North Node in Cancer, again, not really counting that for these purposes, the Midheaven in Libra, and nothing in Capricorn. More with the fixed sign energy, with the Moon and Saturn in Aquarius, Venus in Taurus, but nothing in Leo, and Neptune in Scorpio. But plenty of mutable planets and points, as you can see. The ascendant is in Sagittarius, which is mutable. Mars, Mercury, and the Sun in mutable Pisces. Nothing in Gemini. And then Uranus and Pluto in Virgo. So this is a very mutable individual. Adaptable, flexible, plenty of ideas, good at managing information. Then I'll take a look and see if any planets are particularly strong or weak according to essential dignities. So each planet has particular work to do, and it has some signs that makes it easier to do that work and some signs that make it a little more challenging to do that work. The nature of the Sun, for instance, is such because, it's about discovering who you are. That works really well in a sign like Leo. And it works pretty well in Aries, which is the sign of its exaltation, which means it's a sign it does really well in. But it has a hard time in Aquarius and Libra. The sign of detriment is the sign opposite the sign of rulership. Aquarius is a collectivist sign. It's group-oriented. whereas the sun is about the individual. So the sun has a little bit of a harder time being the sun in Aquarius. And the sign of fall is opposite the sign of exaltation. So the sun has a little bit of a hard time being the sun in Libra. Because again, the sun is about individuality and Libra is about being in a partnership with other people. So I like to go through and just see if there are any planets that are really in a difficult sign for them or the ones that are really strong, especially in their rulership. In this chart, we see that Mercury is in Pisces, which is the sign of its detriment. It's difficult because Mercury's work is about being logical and sequential and keeping ideas organized and communicating in a straightforward, clear way. Pisces doesn't work that way. Pisces is prone to intuitive leaps of fancy. So it's an excellent Mercury placement for a creative or artistic person. It's a little bit more challenging when you get into hardcore logical thinking. It can be done, and sometimes it can be done especially brilliantly because the person works really hard to overcome the innate disadvantage that it's at, and so works very hard and uses the intuitive processes to come up with information that other people might miss. So it can actually not be a bad thing having a planet in its detriment. We can also see from this chart that he has Venus and Saturn in signs that are very strong for them. And that just says we got to pay special attention to Venus and Saturn in his chart because these are really, really strong planets. So to summarize, we found that this chart has an emphasis on planets in the water signs. So it's a person who's intuitive and sensitive. There's an emphasis on the mutable signs. So he's very flexible, lots of ideas, likes to communicate with people. Mercury is in its detriment, which means he doesn't always think in a straight line, but he can be very artistic and creative. And Venus and Saturn are in the signs that they rule. So this means the desire nature described by Venus is very strong, and that he's a natural authority in Aquarius settings, group settings. So next we're going to start looking at planets. I'm going to begin with what astrologer Stephen Forrest refers to as the primal triad, the sun, moon, and ascendant. And taken together, these 3 points sum up the core of a person's personality. The sun describes who I am, the moon is what I need, and the ascendant is this is how I will let you see me. The sign that the sun is in says this is how I find myself. The house is this is where I find myself. And aspects to other planets describe the forces that help or challenge me to find myself. So in this chart, the sun is in the sign of Pisces. We talked about that a little bit earlier. It's a sign of spirituality, of creativity, of vulnerability, of compassion for other people. And through some of these things, a Pisces person will find themselves. So he's done all of these things. He is a talented musician. He was in the seminary to be a Catholic priest. That didn't work out, and eventually he left, but he's still very devout in his faith. He has worked as a therapist, and he currently works in social services for the county. So he definitely is an uber Pisces. He's done all the Pisces stuff that you might expect. Now the house the sun is in again says this is where I find myself. These are the situations that contribute to my self-understanding. He seeks to understand himself with his mind. He wants to analyze himself. And also he was born with a lot of siblings. As I said, he's the youngest of 8 kids. So his siblings had a huge influence on helping him define who he is. And coincidentally, I was a primary schoolmate of his and kind of a neighbor, and he ended up spending a ton of time at my house, to the extent that he became almost like a brother to us. So he he added a few more siblings along with the many siblings he was born with. So definitely situations with siblings, with school, with analysis, with mental understanding. This is where he seeks to understand himself. It's kind of like being a Pisces who wanted to be a Gemini. So aspects to the sun, again, represent forces that help or challenge him to find himself. So I promised I wouldn't go into a lot about aspects, but it's pretty obvious from looking at this clump here that the sun is close to Mercury and Mars. So Mercury and Mars both represent forces that probably help him find himself because they're so close to the sun. So through developing his mental faculties, learning to communicate well, and learning to defend himself, very importantly. These are all things that have contributed to his understanding of who he is, and these are qualities in himself that he identifies with. If we look straight across the chart at 19 degrees of Virgo, which would be opposite the sun, there's nothing there, but Pluto is sort of close. We would call that in orb of being in opposition to the sun. Pluto's a pretty fearsome planet, and it definitely represents forces challenging him to find himself. And Pluto is sort of about power and control. So coming up against strong authority figures and forces beyond his control that make it difficult for him to express who he is. All of that has helped him find his identity and develop it. Next, the moon. The sign the moon is in describes what I need to be safe and comfortable. The house the moon is in says, this is where I seek safety and comfort. And the aspects to the moon represent forces that support or challenge my safety and comfort. So the moon's sign describes how I make myself safe and comfortable. During the live session and in chat, people gave me a lot of good suggestions for Aquarius. And the ones that he really seems to identify with, the ones that make him feel safe and comfortable, are the love of his friendships with other people. He's very comfortable in a group. And also, he likes technology. He's always an early adopter of any technology. And if he's not with friends and hanging out with friends, he's usually on Facebook and connecting with his huge groups of friends that way. Now, the house the moon is in describes where we seek safety and comfort. So the moon in the second house could mean lots of things. The second house is a house of property and stuff. So this can sometimes be a person who collects things because of nostalgia or a way of satisfying a need to feel comfortable. It's also the house of creature comforts, of the things we have to have just to sort of sustain life. So it's kind of like a Taurus house. So it's a person who likes their food and indulges in things that taste nice, likes a comfy couch and a warm, fluffy blanket, and feels very safe and secure. The aspects to the moon represent forces that support or challenge safety and comfort. So we don't see any planets right around the moon here. And we don't see anything opposite in the Leo area of the chart. But those who are attuned to planetary aspects note this little line and character here that connect Venus and the moon with a square 90-degree aspect. That's an aspect that represents conflict, in this case between what I need and what makes me feel safe and comfortable versus what I want. Next, I look at the ascendant, which describes what you let someone see. It's how you encounter the world. The sign on the ascendant, the first house cusp, describes the style of your personal presentation. And the planet that rules the ascendant sign, which we call the chart ruler, indicates one of the main tools that you have for coping with the world. So in this chart, the sign on the ascendant is Sagittarius. That describes the style of presentation. I have this one myself, and the Sagittarius rising is usually a person who has learned to make other people laugh, to disarm them, to be a little bit self-deprecating, but always very optimistic and fun-loving and easygoing. That's the style that he uses to come across. Is it always completely who he is? Well, not always. There's all this Pisces stuff, you know? So he's really very, very sensitive inside. And all of this Virgo stuff, he's probably a little bit self-critical. But you would never guess that just meeting him. You would get all this happy-go-lucky Sagittarius energy. So the chart ruler, or the planet that rules Sagittarius, is Jupiter, which is down here in Aries in the 4th house. So the chart ruler, again, is one of the main tools that we use for coping with the world. Jupiter does that a couple of different ways. One is just through sheer optimism. Oh, everything's going to work out okay. And it's also about education, and he achieved a doctorate degree. So he took education pretty much as far as he could and used that as a way of coping with the world, I think. The more you learn about the world, you know, the more information you have to cope with it. So I would say overall, Jupiter being in the 4th house and Venus being in the 4th house says he did have some help from the family and some cause for optimism. And he was pretty much the favorite child, I think, of his mother, which can be a 4th house figure. Now, the reason a lot of people will want to get an astrology reading is to talk about love, to talk about relationships. And often in astrology, we make a beeline for Venus and we look at the 7th house and we think that's all there is to relationship. There's lots of different ways to be in relationship. For instance, I think when we're talking about a marriage or a long-term relationship that requires compatibility, we really need to look at the sun and moon. They're symbols of male and female, or anima, animus, and they describe who you are and what you need. And really, that's the crux of a long-term partnership. You need someone that really gets you and makes you feel good and comfortable. There is a lot that we can understand about a person's relationship needs by understanding the aspect between the sun and the moon, which again, we're not going to go into that today, but it describes the lunar phase that a person was born at. And this person happens to have been born at the 3rd quarter, the last quarter phase. So they need a partner who understands them and likes them, but will push them to transcend their inner barriers and blockages. Then there's Venus and Mars, the erotic duo. They describe what you want and how you get it. So without even really going into a lot of details about the signs or the houses or the aspects, if you just look at the elements that Venus and Mars are in, you can get a lot of information about how somebody approaches romantic relationships. Venus in Taurus, in an earth sign, wants a good, satisfying, happy, physical relationship, one that makes them feel safe and secure. How do they go after it? Mars and Pisces. So it's not always in a real direct way. But once a Mars and Pisces person decides they want you, they're going to woo you. They'll woo you with music or poetry. It's very romantic. It's very stereotypically romantic, the way Mars and Pisces will woo you. And finally, we do look at the 7th house, the house of relationship. But it's important to begin by looking at the 1st house and the ascendant. Because again, the ascendant is what we're putting out in the world. It's what we're showing people of ourselves. And based on what we put out into the world, that pretty much dictates what will attract back to us from the 7th house. So if a person goes out in the world being Jupiter and happy-go-lucky and very optimistic and, oh, the sun will come out tomorrow and everything's great, they'll have a tendency to magnetize to them people that are a little more skeptical, a little more cynical, but also very funny, just in a different way. So that's the Gemini energy. Another reason people want to come to an astrology reading is to talk about the places where they're blocked and struggling. That is the purview of our friend Saturn. Saturn represents both struggle and achievement. The sign that Saturn is in the chart describes your source of authority, the qualities in you that make others respect you and look up to you. In this chart, Saturn is in Aquarius. And Saturn's in the same sign for a couple of years. So people born, a couple of years before this person was born, up to when he was born, pretty much had Saturn in Aquarius. But these are people who are natural leaders in group situations. You're also respected for knowing how to break the rules effectively with Saturn in Aquarius. The house that Saturn is in, however, does describe a source of great struggle. These are usually areas of life where we struggle throughout our lifetime to make the slightest bit of progress. And we do make progress, but it never feels completely easy. It always feels like a struggle. Saturn in the 3rd house, people often feel as though no one listens to them and no one takes their ideas seriously. This is often connected to an issue with siblings. And certainly this person has a pretty extraordinary sibling situation with so many of them. But even people from relatively small families, they can have one sibling, and maybe the other sibling was thought to be the smart one, or was the favored one, or encouraged to achieve more in school, or whatever it was. But it can often make the person with Saturn in the 3rd house feel a little bit inferior, and like they really have to struggle in this area. So when looking at Saturn in the chart, look to see where they are innately an authority and how they can use those qualities to succeed in the struggle that's symbolized by the house that Saturn is in. And look for close connections between Saturn and the other planets, in particular the primal triad, Sun, Moon, Ascendant, and Venus. And finally, I just wanted to touch on Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These 3 planets move so slowly that everybody in your generation is going to have them in the same sign. About 7 years. So they move so slowly that all the people born about the same time you are have them in the same signs. So it's a little more effective in a quick reading to just look at the house placement of these planets and their aspects, particularly to the sun, the moon, and the angles. Uranus will indicate sudden and shocking change. Neptune is a little more gradual, painful. It's a little bit more like a grieving and a letting go energy. And Pluto represents changes that are related to power and control. So if a person has one of these planets, especially in close aspect to the sun, as he has Pluto, or moon, or the angles of the chart, then there is a lot in their chart that feels like it's kind of out of their control, and there have been big changes and transitions. So these are the essential things I would like you to take away from our session today. So begin approaching a chart by simply eyeballing the chart. Look for emphasis in a sign, a house, a hemisphere. We didn't really cover quadrants, or close to the angles. Then assess the sign, elements, and modalities for the planets to find out the person's qualities of temperament and their way of approaching things. Analyze the primal triad, the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, by sign and house and aspects. Look to the sun and moon, Venus and Mars, and the 1st and 7th houses for clues about relationship. And then look to Saturn to talk about struggle and authority, and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto for thoughts about change and transformation. Well, that is it for today, that quick little recap of the class. Here you can find all the different ways that you can find me online and get in touch with me. You can read my articles and sign up for my free monthly lunar workbook, Working with the Moon, by going to bigskyAstrology.com. On social media, I spend quite a bit of time on Facebook, facebook.com, bigskyAstrology. Almost no time at all at Twitter. I don't frankly really get Twitter, but I make an effort. Twitter.com/bigskyAstrology. I will have more classes coming up in 2016. They're going to be smaller classes, and they'll last for 2 or 3 weeks each. There will be classes in aspects, transits and cycles, progressions, and advanced chart interpretation. So to keep in the loop about when these classes will be offered and how to participate in them, you can go to www.luniversity.com. And for now, that URL will point you to a page on my website that will tell you what's coming up and how to get involved. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this. If you were one of the people that participated in the live class, thank you again so much. It was so much fun to connect with you guys and chat, and especially before and after the meeting. Great fun. Thanks so much. And for the rest of you, I hope we will see you again in future classes. Thanks, and have a good time looking at charts.